Hi, I'm Peter Hill, and this is the D Word, the show where we talk dementia. I've had close links with Canada for many years, having enjoyed some great visits and following the fate of the Toronto Blue Jays baseball team. So I was delighted when I was contacted by the Alzheimer Society of Canada, who wanted to publicise their new report, Navigating the Path Forward for Dementia in Canada. My guest this week is Dr Joshua Armstrong, who was part of the team that produced Canada's first report on dementia across the country in a decade. Before I get into that, though, let's learn more about Josh.
So my name is Josh Armstrong, research scientist with Alzheimer Society of Canada for the last year approximately. I got involved. How did I get involved in Alzheimer's work? Well, when I completed my PhD at the University of Waterloo back in 2013. The PhD itself didn't focus too much on dementia. It was more related on big data, using data sets to better understand care services for older adults. Did have some work in Alzheimer's disease. I do have a background in neuroscience, so that was a little bit there, but I didn't focus it on for the PhD. But for my postdoc, I received funding from the Alzheimer Society of Canada. I went to Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is on the east coast of Canada, where I worked with Drs. Ken Rockwood, Arnold Manitsky, on trying to use data to better understand the relationship between frailty, or like the physical decline with aging, and cognitive decline. So it's kind of a relationship between mind and body using data and advanced mathematical techniques. So that's where I really kind of grew in terms of data analysis and working and trying to better understand health from both the physical body and the brain health from these different perspectives of like math and medicine. And then fast forward for a number of years, I did a number of teaching roles, and then I came on at the Alzheimer Society to really work on this project that led to this first report from the landmark study.
So it's a first report in 10 years, I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, back in approximately 2010, the Alzheimer Society of Canada released what was called the Rising Tide Report, where they worked with the same organization that we worked with for this follow-up report to create a model to try to better understand or predict what can we expect for Canada in terms of dementia numbers. Excuse me.
Yeah, and obviously you've certainly done that. Some quite mind-bending figures, I think, looking at it. I mean, more than 1 million Canadians living with dementia by 2030, which, it's only 8 years away, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the surprising things that I found when I started working with the data. It was like we all knew that there was an increase coming, but how large of an increase and how soon, we're kind of on this cusp of this fairly rapid increase. Like I said, we knew it was coming. It wasn't news to a lot of people in the dementia field, but when you start to see the numbers, it is really quite shocking. So what we did to get these numbers is we worked with CanCEA, the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis. We developed a simulation model where we combine the most recent data in terms of the population from Statistics Canada, so like a good understanding of the population, combined with updated kind of figures from the scientific literature to try to get a better sense of the direction that we're seeing. So that's what we've kind of released in this first report, are the numbers.
Yeah, I think it must be difficult. I mean, you've got a very diverse country, haven't you? From Ontario to the Yukon Northern Territories. I mean, how difficult was it gathering all that data to make it countrywide?
So it's all based on the 2016 census that the Canadian government does. So they collect data from all citizens across the country. We unfortunately don't have enough data to work with the Northern Territories. So the report only covers the 10 provinces from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. That's kind of forms the core, is this governmental data. So we use that to really better understand the population, the sex difference, the sex ratio, ethnicities, ages. We use that all those demographics come from the Statistics Canada data. And then we build onto that understanding of dementia risk factors, and really dial it in to get a better sense of what the expected kind of changes are happening in the country, and then we can use that to kind of project forward what we expect. And this simulation approach isn't just like a pure projection of numbers. It's actually understanding the dynamics of the population, both in terms of life and death, but also you can incorporate immigration as well. If we follow the current immigration trends, we can kind of understand what the population will look like. And if we map onto that, this understanding of dementia, the latest understanding of dementia, we can get a better sense of where we might go in terms of current trends. And then we can also play with that a little bit and look at what, if we can make some tweaks, what would those tweaks look like? I'm sure we'll get into that through our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another statistic came out was far more prevalent in women than men. Generally, women have got an average age expectancy greater than men. Is that the only reason, or are there other things behind that difference?
It's hard for me to really say using the simulation data, but this is definitely a pattern that we see across all high-income countries, is that women outnumber men in about a 2-to-1 ratio. So almost 2/3 of dementia cases are female. So that is largely driven just by the fact that we take that data and we pop it into the model, and then based on the population that we expect, we see these numbers. So it's definitely something we'll see. We're a bit less than 2/3 in Canada, but this could be based on a number of things. But in terms of what's driving that, it's likely primarily the fact that women live longer and have a longer time to develop dementia in late life. Might be some survival bias there too, where men who die earlier before they develop dementia. Those who survive that have healthier hearts and healthier brains, so maybe they don't develop dementia at the same rate. But if we look at the data, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference in risk once you standardize for age and control for these things. It differs across different populations depending on who you're looking at. But it seems like it's primarily age that does drive that difference. But I think there are many important sex differences beyond just that risk that need to be examined when it comes to dementia. I think because we have such different biologies between the sexes, it's important to take a closer look to try to develop our understanding of these differences in biology. Then we can also think about it in terms of gender too. Women have vastly different experiences across their lifespan compared to men, depending on education, occupation, levels of stress and roles in life, all sorts of different things. All these things can increase or decrease risk of dementia in late.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
I'm chatting to Dr Josh Armstrong from the Alzheimer Society of Canada. Now, we have identified many of the risk factors associated with dementia. How much does the public understand about some of the underlying causes?
It's definitely in its infancy, and hopefully with this report we can change that a little bit and try to drive some attention towards this concept of brain health. I think it's a really important way to kind of talk about things, and I feel like when we're talking to older adults, they understand dementia risk. They have some of that fear of developing dementia, so they get it, and they might change their behaviors to try to address dementia risk. But if you're talking to someone in their 50s or 40s or 30s, and you bring up that concept of dementia risk reduction, they might not think it might apply to them very well. So they may not take action to try to address it because they figure that's later down the road. But it's important. As scientists, we know that these changes happen in the brain happen, if not decades before diagnosis. So it's important almost to start at birth. So how can we convince these younger adults to address their dementia risk? I think that going through the route of brain health is the way to do it. So by looking at brain health, we can then hopefully reduce that risk of developing dementia down the road.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of public perception. I mean, we have a lot of adverts about heart health and healthy eating and whatever, but I'm yet to see anything kind of mainstream about brain health.
I totally agree with you. Hopefully we can begin to change that. I know we at the Alzheimer Society are thinking more about that and trying to develop more focusing on brain health and that communication of how you might improve your brain health and how it's related to neurological outcomes at the end of life.
And what's the kind of? I spent years working in public health, and to be honest, dementia was rarely mentioned. I just wonder what the kind of link up is between public health and dementia now. Is it still kind of as diverse as it here in the UK? Or is there a better together?
I don't see a lot of public health units talking. Like here we have public health units kind of organized within separate provinces, but then also down to the regions. And I do see some programming coming out of certain smaller regions within Ontario, the province that I live in. But not all provinces are focused on, not all health regions are focused on it. That's something that I hope maybe we can achieve with this report, is try to embed more of this conversation about brain health. And if we think about all the diseases of aging, they all kind of have all these same underlying risk factors. So maybe by including brain health, we can kind of have more talk about healthy aging and focus and combine efforts. So we're not just focusing on one organ system at a time, focus across the whole body and hopefully lead to better public health outcomes. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. There's not a lot of focus on brain health. I think it's a relatively new idea and concept. So it takes some time to kind of build up that momentum, and hopefully we'll see some of that momentum build in the upcoming years.
Yeah, hopefully so, definitely. I mean, one thing that comes out big time from the report to me is carers and caregivers. Not only the number, the finance behind what they provide as well. I mean, sometimes here in the UK, it's not fully understood, I feel, that the role that caregivers play in keeping people living reasonably well with dementia.
Yeah, so that's a big part of what we do with Alzheimer Society of Canada. We do provide a lot of supports to care partners, help them provide information, try to develop systems so that they have support. So not only can they provide better care to that person living with dementia, but they can take care of themselves as well. They play such an important role, at least in our Canadian system. Most people living with dementia prefer to live at home. The majority do so, and they're only able to do that not because of the professional care supports, but because of what are often termed informal caregivers. I prefer the term care partners. They provide a range of different supports across the whole spectrum of dementia. Early on, there's less needed for their supports, but as the dementia develops, they have more and more a bigger role to play in that person's lives. And I don't think our care systems would be able to handle the increasing numbers of dementia if we didn't have the support of family members, friends, or even neighbors providing these extra supports to people living in the community.
Yeah, I like the phrase care partner because I often feel where it works well with people caring for people and hopefully maintaining their own at home is a real partnership between the caregiver and the person living with dementia.
Mm-hmm. And they're a partner in the care, and it's a two-way street too. So it's not just giving; there's a more relationship there. It's a tricky area. I've heard some criticisms of care partner as well. So I'm not sure you can never get everyone happy with the term, but I think it's a bit better than informal caregiving, because that kind of contrasts with the formal care system, which makes sense to policymakers, and some academics use that term. But I think when you're talking to an individual who's providing that care, they don't like to be referred to as an informal caregiver, because what about their role is informal, other than the fact that they don't get paid?
Well, we have some exciting news that our shows, including the D Word, will shortly be available in podcast format, so you'll be able to listen to them on all the major podcast platforms. So keep an eye out on social media at TDW Radio on Twitter and the TDW Radio Facebook page to find out when the D Word podcast will be available. My guest this week is Dr Josh Armstrong from the Alzheimer Society of Canada, and we're talking about the first national study on dementia in Canada for 10 years. One of the groups that often get missed out are carers, who across the world save governments billions of pounds. So how do we get that message across to the politicians who hold the purse strings?
Well, we can get the message across. Whether they do something about it is a whole secondary question. but definitely have had a good response to this data. There's not a lot of information on care partners, so this report, using the simulation, we were able to like model this kind of support into the data, and we were able to show that these numbers. So we've shown the number of caregivers, then we can also get estimates for the number of hours provided. Then you can do quick math to convert that into dollar figures by showing how much full-time work that is. That all demonstrates that there is this great resource that's being used and maybe not fully supported. So hopefully with this report and with our arguments, we can get more support for these individuals. Like I mentioned earlier, not just for them to provide that care, but also so they can take care of themselves. Many care partners are spouses of aging individuals, have their own healthcare issues. So they'll also need support. And if we don't have them to provide that support, we could be in some serious trouble.
Yeah, and I guess it's an expanding issue because there may be care partners that have to give up their own job to look after the person they care with. So
our Canadian data says that on average, care partners provide 26 hours a week of care to someone living with dementia, and that is, I think, approximately like 8 to 10 hours higher than care provided to someone else with a different chronic disease. So there's a bit more care involved when it comes to dementia. And as I mentioned earlier too, that changes. It's dynamic over the course of the disease. Might be lesser in earlier years and more in late years. And one thing I should mention about our model and the numbers that we share, they're very conservative because the way we've had to model it is that once someone enters long-term care within the model, they're no longer have any care partners, which we know for a fact is not true. We just didn't have the data to try to build that into the model. So I would say that our estimates are definitely conservative and don't fully capture the amount of work that goes into providing care to people living with dementia in Canada.
Yeah, I guess it's probably the same worldwide. If you look at the position here in the UK, I mean, it's also broadening out of it. It's a really tough time to try and get a new message across. We've just come out of a pandemic. There's a lot of global financial crisis going on. It must be a really good, really tough time to try and get those messages across.
It's definitely is. I don't know how much resources are available for building up new supports and new systems, but hopefully at least having a better understanding and having some figures to work from, governments can take those and realize that there is this issue. Some people, if they don't have a lot of knowledge of dementia, might not even consider the care partner component of things. So that's where I think it's also important just to shine a light on it. So we might not be able to drive instant changes, but a lot of people are aware of how the important role that partners play in the care of people living with dementia. I think that's a win right there. And I've been presenting this a fair bit over the last couple months, and it's surprising to see the number of people that kind of have a positive reaction, like, "Oh, I never thought about that component of dementia before." So for me, that's us being successful by trying to educate people about understanding the complexity that happens around dementia. It's not just about a diagnosis and then you're done. There's this whole kind of ecosystem that needs to be considered when it comes to people living with dementia.
Yeah, it's kind of building up the knowledge base, isn't it, of people so they can make informed decisions and they can, as you say, highlight things that perhaps they've never thought about, which I think is an interesting thing. And I think, here, the reason we set this show up was because nobody wanted to talk about the D word. No one wants to talk about dementia. The whole premise of the show is just get people talking. Do you think over maybe the 10 years since the previous report, people do speak more about dementia, or are we kind of still back where we were?
I think we've definitely seen an improvement, at least in some parts of the population. We do know that there are segments within the Canadian population where there is a stigma. People don't want to talk about it, don't even want to acknowledge it. People might be experiencing memory issues, but they won't even bring that up because they're afraid of what the diagnosis will mean in terms of their life. So we definitely do still see pockets of that. But overall, I believe there is a better public understanding of dementia. And I think a lot of it's driven by this baby boomer cohort, which I'm sure you guys talk about in England as well, is this large group of Canadians all getting into their late 70s. So they're, I think, better educated and more of a better understanding of dementia compared to the previous generation. So that kind of has shifted things a little bit. And part of this update with this current report that we've incorporated is this kind of reduction in dementia incidence that we've seen across Canada and other high-income countries where people aren't developing dementia at as high a rate. So that might show that these baby boomers are living healthier and maybe reducing their risk of dementia. But just by the simple fact that there are so many older adults getting into their 70s and 80s, we're still going to see dementia as a significant public health challenge in Canada and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Here and throughout the rest of the world. Interesting part of the report for me was the bit about delaying the onset of dementia and what knock-on effect that could have later on down the line.
Yeah, I think that was for me, that's one of the most exciting parts, at least of the first report, was what we did was, so because we're using the simulation model, we are able to artificially push off onset across the whole population by 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years. And that can give us a better idea if we were able to do that effectively, what would that mean in terms of our overall national numbers? And if you read the report, the effect is substantial. It's huge. A simple 1 year push off, it means again about 500,000 Canadians wouldn't develop dementia that did in the original model. 5 year push off, we're seeing even larger numbers. So this really demonstrates the power of prevention. If we are able to effectively reduce risk across the population, we would see it's not only important at the individual level, but from a population level, we see huge effects, which really means that if we can't really, I personally don't expect a silver bullet cure anytime soon. So really, I think we should put more effort into our prevention efforts. And this demonstrates the fact that the power that prevention might have at the population level.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
I'm talking to Dr Josh Armstrong, and one of the things that comes out of the report is the great benefits of delaying the onset of dementia.
Yeah, we highlight some of the findings from the Livingston 2020 article from The Lancet, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Some of your listeners will probably be familiar with. So we've taken that and we've kind of re-looked at it. We've made a new figure that has this nice head shape and highlights these 12 modifiable risk factors for dementia. As you know, there's the non-modifiable ones. You can't do much about your age, can't do much about your sex at birth, can't do anything about who your parents are, your genetics, but you can address these different factors. That figure lists 12, but the actual list of modifiable risk factors is growing all the time. It's much more than just those 12. Those are the 12 main ones from that Livingston report. And that Livingston report comes from a global perspective as well. And one thing I'm realizing is that it might be better to think about modifiable risk factors not from a global perspective, but in terms of a Canadian perspective and even provincial or regional perspective in Canada, identify what are the most prevalent modifiable risk factors within each different population, and maybe those would be the lowest hanging fruit that we could try to tackle to reduce dementia risk in those populations. Because in Canada, it's a large country, as you mentioned, and different characteristics across the different populations. Some have healthier habits, some have less healthier habits, some have more risk of heart disease, some have less. So if we can use data to better understand our populations in terms of these modifiable risk factors, we might be better off to try to address them in a more nuanced way rather than across the board. I think that's an important direction that hopefully we'll see happen.
Yeah, I think that's quite a direct intervention and a positive look forward that you're able to do because of the diversity of your country, a lot more than a lot of other places to do. It'd be very difficult for us to achieve that, I think, in UK, because we haven't got that major diversity that you have.
Might give you an opportunity, though, to look. You must have some sort of regional organization. Look within those regions to try to identify: is there differences across the different regions where you can find things to tackle easier, or is it just one blanket approach? But to do that, you have to do the research and figure out what are those modifiable risk factors across the population. How can we best form a strategy to try to address those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's been the reaction to the report since it's come out?
Reaction's been great. Lots of media coverage, lots of meetings with governments, both at the federal level but also provincial level, and those meetings seem to be ongoing. We released a report back in September, but even as a week or two ago, I was meeting with provincial representation in Ontario. But then also, so there's meeting with governments, meeting with media, and then we have this Alzheimer Society kind of federated system. So then we're meeting with the different provinces as well, giving them more information about what's going on in their population and what type of messaging can be used to try to inform their governments and their population about what's happening in terms of dementia in each province.
Yeah, it sounds very, very encouraging. Again, because of the diversity, I guess, and the number of provinces, it must be difficult in terms of a big banner of Alzheimer Society of Canada to kind of hold it all together and make sure you get a consistent approach together.
Yeah, we have what we call a federated model. So I work at the national organization. And then underneath us, we have all the provinces, and then some of the provinces even have local societies. So it's this kind of umbrella approach. So where we are at the national level can communicate across all the different provinces, and the provinces themselves do more of the hands-on care and the day-to-day business, whereas we handle the organization across the country. So it's one way that we can kind of drive some of these research findings and then also share them across the country, so everyone gets access to them and are able to use them to, whether it's for talking with their governments or fundraising for their own services as well. You can use this as a kind of a shared approach to this research work.
I think you've demonstrated the real power of having accurate and good data. Do you feel sometimes people think research is all about scientists in white coats and test tubes, and not about the kind of area that you're dealing with in getting that data together?
Yeah, I think to some degree that's what they think. And it's complex, right? Because science is a big industry, and there are the lab-based, the white coat people, and there are social scientists. So there's across the board, there's all sorts of different types of science, and people have all sorts of different ideas of what science is. Part of, I think, my strength coming to this role is I'm interdisciplinary background. I understand biology and lab-based science, but I also understand epidemiology and policy. So to try to pull that together to communicate it, I think I've done a good job at that, and I hope to continue to try to do that and educate people from this kind of broad perspective, bringing in different types of sciences and communicate them at a level that people can understand. When you read the report, you might recognize that it's written in such a way that most people can understand it. It's lay level, good for the public, good for policymakers, but also good for scientists who rely on some of the data to kind of drive some of their own work.
Yeah, I was going to mention that in the fact that I've looked through the report, and it is very easy to read, very very easy to understand and comprehend, which sadly, I think with a lot of research is not always the case. I have a friend living with dementia, Wendy Mitchell, who has the concept of what she calls the jargon jar. Every time she goes into a meeting with scientists, when they start using jargon, she asks for a contribution to a jargon jar. Because they can't, it's a real skill to interpret that data and put it in an understandable format.
So part of the advantage that I had, I guess, as a research scientist at the Alzheimer Society is I wasn't using an academic approach trying to fit into academic journal. Our audience was very broad, which is a challenge in one way, but we have a whole team, people with expertise in knowledge, translation and communication. So we really put in some effort to make it so it was accessible. So that in terms of not just the jargon, but the way it's written, it's not long, big paragraphs. It's not too dense. It's pretty almost, I don't want to say surface level, but we don't get lost in the weeds at all. It's trying to just communicate things in a clear way so that anyone can understand it and take something from it.
Yeah, I think you've done a great job. People pass me various documents, and I've got to say, sometimes I dread it, thinking, this is just so heavy. Whereas, you have really succeeded in producing an eminently readable document that also gets the points across that it needs to get across. Everybody can make something readable, but not necessarily get those important points across as well.
Well, thanks so much. We really put a lot of effort into trying to make it that way. Another thing that I should mention, too, that we try to do with the report is we wanted to come across as kind of like inspirational, not kind of being like, you guys, government's not doing enough. We didn't want to be like ranting on a soapbox. We wanted to take a more inspirational approach and be positive and just kind of lay the facts out and not be that on a soapbox preaching to the converted. We wanted to just be like, this is a challenge for everyone, all Canadians, from the individual to government. This is what we're expecting. Let's all try to meet this challenge. To take a kind of a positive spin of things and not be overly negative about things. And I feel like that comes across as you read it as well. We're not ranting. We're trying to just convey information and inspire people to meet this challenge.
I think it does that very well. It lays out the situation, and it's almost like, hey guys, we got a problem here. It's going to take all of us to address it.
That's a nice way of putting it. That's that's the vibe we wanted to put out.
Well, I'm glad. Unfortunately, time's drawing us to a close, Josh. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And once again, congratulations on producing the report. But, hopefully people outside Canada will read it as well and look at some of the messages which are contained in it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this, like I mentioned earlier, this is the first report of 3. The report I'm currently working on is hopefully building off those numbers. We want to connect those numbers to stories. Because as you might see, there's millions of Canadians that will develop dementia. That's millions of stories that are being affected by the condition. So we really want to try to tie in those numbers to people's stories, looking closer at sex differences, ethnicity, and young onset dementia as well. And in addition to Indigenous peoples of Canada too, who are developing dementia at a higher rate. And once we kind of build that report on stories, we want to then continue on to look at then the dollar figures. So we'll layer on top of the data, economic findings, looking at hospitalizations, long-term care usage, pharmaceuticals, etc. So then get a really cost of what the dementia will be like in Canada over the next 30 years. So it's going from the numbers to the people to the dollars.
Sounds a great plan. Hopefully we can get you back on when the other parts of the reports come out to have another chat about them. That would be really nice. And once again, Josh, thank you so much for being my guest here on the D Word. My thanks to Josh, and it doesn't matter if you're in Canada or not, the report Navigating the Path Forward for Dementia in Canada is a really interesting read, and it's available online at alzheimer.ca. That's all we have time for this week. Thanks as always to Angela, our production assistant. Now you won't want to miss next week's show, but my guest will be former Only Fools and the Horses star Daniel Peacock, who's given up his showbiz career to work with people living with dementia. So until then, thanks for listening and take care now.